Hi everyone, it's Rachel with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you another science fiction and fantasy wrap-up. Before we get into the actual books, I have a little bit of a backstory here because a few weeks ago I read a book that I absolutely loved. My favorite thing on the channel is finding some that I consider to be underhyped. I've never personally seen anyone else talk about this book on Booktube before, and I read it and loved it, and so I filmed a video, I gushed about it, and then I posted that video, and then absolutely no one in the comments said that they were going to read that book. And I'll be honest, I felt pretty distraught as a booktuber. I felt like I had failed because it is my job to promote and gush about the books that are worth reading and get those books into more people's hands. Then I had failed because no one wanted to read this book. But then one really smart and detailed subscriber dropped a comment saying that they noticed there was a certain book that was in the description of my video that wasn't actually included in the footage. And I'm so glad they said that because basically I filmed the video, I edited it, and I somehow deleted the entire clip out of the video. Thankfully, I did find it on a backup on my computer. I eventually have to delete it because I don't have unlimited storage, but I do keep it for a few weeks. So I saved the footage. I could just refilm the video review, but honestly, I just want to repost the footage so you can see my authentic reaction the first time I'm talking about it on camera. So if all things work out, hopefully you'll see the clip here in a moment. And if it doesn't appear, well, at that point, I'm just going to quit Booktube and declare myself a failure at editing. But I'm excited to see you all hearing about this book and hopefully excite a few of you to check it out for yourself. And again, thank you to that subscriber because honestly, if you hadn't mentioned it, I would have assumed that the clip was in the previous video and then I would have never discussed the book again. And this Booktube darling, or darling to me, would have stayed a mystery on this channel until it randomly popped up in my end of the year video, in which case people would probably say, hey, why did you never review this book all year? So anyway, all that being said, let's get started with that clip. Next up is The Swarm by Frank. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He is a German author. This is translated into English, and this is a very chunky, long book, but is absolutely worth your time. This is a apocalyptic story that is set in a near future where you realize that nature is starting to uprise in some way against humanity. There are whale attacks. There is a shelf near Europe that collapses in the sea. There are crabs and different sea creatures and animals that are acting strangely, and it appears like the end of the world may be upon us. This is a story that's told over multiple perspectives. You get to see all around the world so that it really has that dynamic full circle perspective, and I loved it. This book, dare I make the comparison, reminds me a lot of Neil Stephenson, who is easily becoming one of my favorite science fiction authors, and so any author that has a similar feel to that really gets me excited. Again, this book is long, which is maybe, again, why it did remind me of Neil Stephenson. There's lots going on, there are tons of characters, and within the story there's so many great conversations about biology and how animals behave and nature and environment. It never comes across as preachy, it more just feels like an author who is very involved in the science community, having all of these ideas and having them shared through the characters. So this book, again, never feels like you're being talked at, but instead it's just so fascinating what you are seeing on the page and what is happening. And I found it to be very exciting, very epic in nature. And again, I think it's a book that works as a longer piece because there is so much happening, so much unfolding. And again, you get different perspectives. I've heard people say that it's not necessarily the most character-focused story, and I would agree with that. But at the same time, I was completely happy to be with each of the characters when they were in the story. They kind of serve a purpose. And it's more a way to, again, explore this large idea of what this future apocalypse would look like. It's exciting, but it's very much grounded in science. Within the book, there is a long part that really explains kind of all of the author's fact-checking and the different sources that they use to combine and create this story. And I would love to read more by this author. I think there's at least one other book that's translated that's available to me, so I'm going to try to check that out from my library. But needless to say, this is kind of a preview for my next book haul because I loved it so much. I bought myself a copy, and yeah, I burned through this book despite it being like, this copy is like almost 900 pages. I burned through it in a couple days. Again, I'm a fast reader, but there's something about certain books where I just cannot put them down. I don't want to make supper. I don't want to be a good parent. I just want to read. And that was very much the experience here. Don't get me wrong. I did feed my child. I always need to give that disclaimer. But I'll be honest, I was quite happy to give him a peanut butter sandwich so we could go back to reading. So highly recommend. This book is just fantastic. Love it so much. And yeah, definitely Neil Stephenson vibes, a little bit of Michael Crichton. So if that's someone that you enjoy, this is just kind of a longer, more extensive, more epic version of that, but definitely has like sci-fi thriller vibes. So highly recommend, loved it so much. Definitely a high contender for my favorites at the end of the year. Next, let's talk about the Mimicking of Known Successes by Malka. This is a science fiction novella that follows an investigator who goes to this colony on Jupiter. Someone has disappeared, and so they're trying to investigate what happened to them. This is described as a science fiction Holmesian mystery. It's very cozy in nature and is very character driven. While the character is not exactly Sherlock Holmes, I definitely can see the comparisons. They make a lot of inferences and references, and they're very detail oriented in how they do their investigations. I really enjoyed it. The way it shows on Goodreads, I believe this is going to be the beginning of a novella series, so I definitely love to see more from this investigator. This book also has some sapphic queer romance, which I never really mind in books as long as it's not too overt and it's on this case, and so I don't mind a little romance on the side, but definitely this book was focused enough on the mystery to hold my attention. I want to read more by this author. I know that she has another series, Infomocracy, and so hopefully I will get to that one pretty soon because this one was definitely enjoyable. Next up, we have Meru by S.B. Divya, and this is a science fiction story that is set in a future where humanity has split into two groups. Basically, there are the humans that have stayed on Earth, and then there are the post-humans that have left Earth behind and have moved on or transcended to a different experience. However, there is an Earth-like planet that they have found, and together, two individuals, one from each group, go together to this planet to investigate it. This is a story with a bit of queer romance within it, and within the story, it's very hyper-focused on these two characters. I was very excited to get a review copy of this one because it sounded right up my alley. I'm always looking for really unique science fiction stories, and this one almost had a folklore or a fable aspect to it. It just felt very mythical and different, even though it was science fiction. And while I like parts of it, I'll fully admit that it didn't entirely work for me. I think the hard part is that a book like this is so dependent on caring for the two characters because, again, it's a very intimate story and you see less of the larger world and instead spend a lot of time with these two individuals. And I just never found them to be very interesting. And because of that, everything built on that story is really reliant on my caring for them. And so I like this one, but my feelings towards it, I'll admit, are kind of lukewarm. Next up is African Risen, which I believe is a book sent unsolicited to me. I don't remember requesting this one, but this is a collection of short stories that is all told from Black perspectives. It is SFF, it is speculative fiction, so science fiction and fantasy blended together. And this is a collection that I don't think I personally actually requested, simply because of the fact that I review very little short stories these days. It's just not my preferred format when it comes to science fiction, fantasy, or horror for that matter, simply because I like to have the stories more expanded. I like a longer narrative style, and I simply like, especially with SFF, more time in the world building. So while this is not my favorite format, I happen to really love diverse voices. I love to hear from Black perspectives and expand my own worldview, so I definitely wanted to give it a try. And I gotta say, overall, it was a great collection. There are some names within this book that I recognize, and then there's also many that I did not, and that is a great way to find out about books and authors that you haven't necessarily heard about. Of my favorites, one is by Tiana Reeve-Dew, which has written some of my favorite horror books, and so I was really excited to see something by her. And there was also some other stories that I did enjoy. I do have my Goodreads review linked down below because I'll be honest, I don't really remember the titles offhand, but definitely go check that out. The one thing I didn't entirely love about the book is more of a personal preference, and that's the fact that these stories read very contemporary while they have SFF or speculative elements to them. They are very much grounded in the modern day or the current climate, and often when I come to SFF, I'm going there to escape, and so I like my fantasy to be very fantastical and epic, and when I go to science fiction, I'm usually looking for something very futuristic and different, and this book was just a little bit contemporary for my personal taste, but again, that's just me. If you love speculative fiction that really plays with contemporary times, this one might appeal to you even more. And switching over to fantasy, I did read Lightblade, which is a lit RPG. It's a book that I received as an audio book because I won a giveaway on Twitter. And so this is a story I was very excited to pick up because I've read the author's previous work, which ended up being one of my favorites of last year. And so I was very excited to check out more by them. I will admit that lit RPG isn't necessarily my cup of tea. I haven't read a ton of it, but the books I haven't necessarily blown me away. Probably my favorite has been Sufficiently Advanced Magic, but everything else I've read hasn't really gotten me very excited. So I was interested to check this one out because I love the author's other work so much, which is more epic fantasy. And this one was fun. It was enjoyable. I thought that it made sense, but it's a very long book. On audio, it's 17 hours at normal speed. And for me, even if I speed it up, I just found it to be a little bit long. I was kind of ready for the book to be done before it was. And so I would cautiously recommend this one to people who enjoy lit RPGs because I do think it was well done for what it was doing. I didn't really have any criticisms. I didn't really see necessarily any plot holes or problems or issues with the characters. I just don't think I really love this genre. So I'd love for you all to weigh in. Do you love lit RPG? If so, give me your favorites. Tell me what your recommendations are. And if you share my opinion, I'd love to know if I'm not alone because I want to love this genre. So I'm going to keep trying it, but also not every book is for every reader and I need to accept that too. And finally, I'm really excited to talk about a fantasy series that I just finished and absolutely loved, and that is the Night Angel Trilogy, all by Brent. So the first book is The Way of Shadows, the second one being Shadow's Edge, and the third one being Beyond Shadows. These are the new covers sent out by Orbit, and I was very lucky to receive review copies so that I could check this out. If you're not aware, I mentioned in my spring TBR, but there is a new book coming out in April, and they sent that as well, so I'll be talking about that one closer to the release date. I haven't read it yet, but they were kind enough to send these new covers so that I could not just gush about how nice the covers are, but actually read the books. And so I would be prepared to jump into the new one, since I do believe you want to go in with that background of the original story. And I gotta say, I enjoy these. I'm gonna put down those two. It's a little bit heavy, but I'll hold up this first one here. So The Way of Shadows is the first book in the series, and you do want to start at the beginning. This is a piece of assassin fantasy, and within the story we follow a young man who is thrown into assassin life. He learns from an expert and slowly gets pulled into that world. This is one that I was excited to pick up, but also a little bit nervous. So for context, I should let you know that I have read the author's other series, Lightbringer, and so I've read all 5 books, and there's lots of controversial opinions online about that series. I fully admit that the series is not perfect. In fact, I have some very clear issues with it, things about it that I do not love, and some character motivations that never fully worked for me. But despite those criticisms, I actually still really like the series. I've read it twice now, and I really enjoy it. And I do think it's a series where you have to see it all the way through to understand what the author is trying to do. And I know a lot of people hate the ending of that one, but I really think that you have to actually go through the series in order to appreciate why the ending is the way it is, and on reread it made so much more sense. So anyway, I don't want to review the Lightbringer here, I want to review this series. So this is the series that he wrote before the Lightbringer, and I've heard mixed things about it. I've heard that it's not as good, and I've heard just different things, and so I didn't know what to expect, but I always have to try the series for myself because, as many of you know, I tend to have really unpopular opinions, good or bad, and in this case I really enjoyed it. I've previously said that I didn't think that assassin fantasy was for me. I read Nevernight, and honestly I was kind of let down. It just didn't really work very well for me, but this one did. It's lighter in tone, it's fun, but it also has some great social commentary, some great aspects of character work and relationships. I can see a lot of the threads of some of the character work that he does in his later books started in this trilogy here. So he makes some interesting commentary around the role of women in patriarchal societies. And again, if you look at it with a certain feminist lens, you can be critical of it, but I also think that Brent Weeks kind of knows what he's talking about. And again, you can have a story where the characters are in a world that is imperfect, and it's not necessarily the authorial voice, but rather the author making commentary on how people have to live within those societies. And so I actually enjoyed a lot of the little nods and winks and commentary that came all throughout this series. I found the plot to be very exciting. I often struggle with like really action-based stories, but this one was more character focused than I expected. Certainly there's really cool action assassin-y scenes, but it's really balanced out with some well fleshed out characters. So overall, I really liked the first one, and I thought that the second second and third one were just as strong, if not even a little bit stronger, because in a story that is very character focused, I often find that the later books are even better because you've spent more time with the characters and you get to see their development. They grow, they change, they don't feel like static stereotypes or character cutouts, but instead feel like very dynamic, fleshed out individuals. So if you can't tell, I really like this one. I went in with low-key expectations. I knew that I liked Brent Week's writing and plotting at other points, but I'd heard mixed things about this series, and I gotta say, once again, I think I have an unpopular opinion because I don't know what other people are talking about, but I love this series. I'm really excited to read the next book. As soon as April comes around, you'll see that review. And in the meantime, I honestly might reread the series because I had so much fun with it the first time. Highly recommend if you have my strange taste in books and love fantasy that involves assassins and good characters, this is one you may want to check out. And for my Booktube shoutout this week, I want to recommend Jonathan from Words in Time. I think most of you already know his channel if you follow mine, but regardless, he is worth the time to shout out because I do really enjoy his channel. He talks primarily about science fiction. I rarely, if ever, see him reading fantasy, so if you're looking for someone very dedicated to the sci-fi genre, this is a great channel to go to. And I really like that he does a lot of community building. He does these really cool videos where they are, I believe, pre-filmed, but they are essentially live streams where he gets another booktuber online and they discuss a topic, they do recommendations of a various kind, and it's just really entertaining to watch. And again, I love the fact that he is also building his channel while shouting out other people through that. And besides that, overall, I just think he seems like a really nice guy for the little that we chat online, and he has great recommendations, a good combination of newer science fiction and older classics, and I think that he just does really creative, fun content. So if you're looking for that, go check them out. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know of the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out? And bonus points if you mention The Swarm in the comments section. Even if you don't plan on reading it, just please acknowledge that The Swarm is in this video, because I thought I was going crazy when I posted that video and I was like, why is no one talking about The Swarm? There's this amazing, chunky science fiction book that I loved and no one else but me on the internet cares about it. I was so beside myself until I finally got that comment letting me know that I completely deleted the footage during my editing process. So silly me, apparently I need to get more sleep, but even that's getting better these days. So if you're new to my channel and haven't already clicked off because I'm crazy, I do read a lot of science fiction, fantasy, horror, thrillers, and true crime. So if you want to subscribe, I appreciate if you stick around. If you want to give me a thumbs up for this video, thank you for that. If you want to drop a comment, even if it's just a little spaceship or a picture of like lost footage, I don't know, like a picture or a video camera, I don't know, get creative here. And then if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.